Good morning, everybody. As mayor of Louisville, I have the privilege to meet a lot of folks around our city, people of every age in every neighborhood, and frequently I talk to them about what's going on with their lives. So I get to share with them all the happiness that they're experiencing as families, but oftentimes I also talk with them about the sorrows that they are going through and the fears that they have about their families and what the future might hold. And increasingly, those fears and sorrows are centered on a sad reality, and that reality is that an opioid epidemic is ravaging our nation, our state, and our city as well, like we have never seen before. As I walk and ride through our city, I see how the opioid crisis has literally put people walking like zombies on our street, either walking the streets or just slumped on the street. And I've mourned with families that have lost loved ones due to this crisis, and or loved ones that they're very concerned about, where their future is being robbed by a substance abuse disorder, including opioid addiction. And when I visit the jail, I talk with those going through withdrawal and stressed correction workers who find themselves working in the largest detox facility in the state, and that's our jail. The data shows us that in 2016, more than 360 people in Louisville died of an overdose. Most of those were from opioids. In the first month of this year alone, Louisville's Metro Emergency Services respond to 695 opioid-related overdose calls. That's an average of 22 a day. And these are folks from all ages, every neighborhood, rich and poor. No one is immune from this. And even if somehow you've not experienced a personal loss to this national and local public health crisis, you are still impacted by it. In addition to the costs in human life and human potential, the opioid crisis has put a severe strain on our healthcare facilities, our police, our emergency responders, our jail, and our justice system. I want to thank all of our first responders and public safety officials who have dealt with this with unflagging energy to deal with something that none of us saw coming a couple of years ago. And this has led to lots and lots of extra effort on their part. So folks up here, I want to thank you guys for the tremendous work that y'all are doing day in and day out here. This plague has also led to increased crime on the streets and neighborhoods of our city and the streets and neighborhoods of cities all over the country. And then plus, outside of the human cost, researchers put the total economic burden of the nation's prescription opioid epidemic at $78.5 billion. And guess who pays for that? All of us do, taxpayers. I believe it's time for that to change. It's time for the companies that started this epidemic and turned a blind eye to its consequences to take responsibility for the devastation that they've caused. So today, the city of Louisville has filed suit against the country's three largest wholesale drug distributors, Cardinal Health, AmerisourceBergen, and McKesson, for dumping millions of opioids into our neighborhoods while refusing to fulfill their legally mandated obligations to monitor, identify, report, and halt suspicious shipments of these drugs. Under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, these companies have a duty to disclose suspicious orders of controlled substances to the Drug Enforcement Administration, a duty to keep these drugs out of the illicit market. In a lawsuit filed today in U.S. District Court, we charge that the three wholesale distributors with combined annual revenues of $400 billion have failed to do that. Instead, they have turned their heads and profited from the flood of pills into communities like ours. The data shows us that in many states, including Kentucky, there are more opioid prescriptions issued per year than there are people in the state. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, overdose deaths involving prescription opioids have quadrupled since 1999, and so have sales of these prescription drugs. And during that same time frame, more than 183,000 people have died in the United States from overdoses related to prescription opioids. Don't you think these companies might have noticed a red flag waving on this issue much sooner? Many of the people overdosing in our community today on heroin and fentanyl began their addiction on prescription opioids. As law enforcement effectively shut down pill mills and the criminals who fueled that source, victims of opioid addiction turn to the cheaper, more easily accessible, illicit and deadly drugs like heroin and fentanyl. These companies are complicit in that, and we intend to hold them accountable. Our goal with this lawsuit is to dramatically reduce the flow of prescription opioid painkillers into our community and force those who caused the crisis to pay for the treatment and service costs that our community can no longer absorb. We are seeking damages to cover the cost of medical care for patients suffering from opioid use disorder or disease, treatment of infants born with opioid-related medical conditions, costs associated with caring for children whose parents suffer from substance abuse disorder, and related law enforcement and public safety services. Cases like these cost millions of dollars of resources for expert analysis and scientific and medical data, and that's money our city does not have. Instead, we have engaged outside counsel who will receive a contingent fee and pay all expenses to litigate the case. The city will not be out a dime. The attorneys will be reimbursed for reasonable expenses as awarded and approved by the courts as well. I'm going to let Jefferson County Attorney Mike O'Connell provide more details about how that will work. But first, let me close my remarks with this message. We have lost a generation of people to opiates. We've seen a spike in violent crime tied directly to the sale and misuse of opioids. And we are spending millions of dollars on health, public safety, and justice expenses tied to this epidemic, money that instead could go to lifelong learning, to affordable housing, to pave more roads, plant more trees, many ways we can use this in our community. So it is only right that the for-profit companies that fuel this epidemic be part of ending it. We intend to see that they are. Now I'd like to ask Mike O'Connell, our county attorney, to come forward and give more details on this. Mike has been relentless in the pursuit of justice on this and is a fantastic partner of mine and our city. Mike O'Connell.
Thank you, Mayor Fisher, and thank each of you for coming today. I must admit that of the many things that my office and I handle each day, that there's only one current issue that I think about each and every day I wake up without fail, and that issue is how my family and other families in our community and throughout our country endure through the opioid plague that haunts us. Unfortunately, I don't get a day off from it. As the lawyer for the people of Louisville and Jefferson County, I have to look objectively at the legal questions surrounding the opioid plague here. Are we facing a crisis, and are there identifiable costs? The answer is a resounding yes. Statistically, too, as Mayor Fisher was talking about, from 2012 through the middle of 2017, more than 197 million doses of prescription opioids were dispensed in Jefferson County. That is more than 258 doses of prescription opioids for every man, woman, and child in Louisville. During the same period, excuse me, during the same period, more than 3.5 million doses of overdose antidotes, including naloxone, have been dispensed in Jefferson County, nearly 5 per person. With those numbers, it is no wonder that so many of our families, friends, and neighbors got hooked and have turned to heroin that now routinely gets laced with deadly fentanyl in the dealer's attempts to stretch supply to meet an insatiable demand. That's why we've averaged one overdose death every day last year in Metro and Jefferson County. But are we able to identify the players most responsible for the cause of the crisis with an eye toward holding them accountable? After thorough analysis, I believe we have done that in the nation's largest wholesale opioid distributors. Congress put wholesale distributors in a position of trust as the gatekeepers of highly addictive opioids because the chances for abuse were so great. These distributors failed in that obligation, either refusing or turning a blind eye to their duties to monitor, identify, report, and stop suspicious shipments. These companies have already admitted they failed to report suspicious package information to the DEA. McKesson was fined $150 million just this year. These companies have profited off this epidemic to such a degree that fines of $150 million and more are simply viewed as a cost of doing business. So yes, I think there is liability on the part of these distributors that has left our taxpayers in this community and other communities around this nation holding the bill. That's why we've engaged outside counsel who are at the forefront of this issue, and we are going to be led by Peter Mouget, behind me, this way, of the law firm of Pompantonio, Levin and Pompantonio out of Pensacola, Florida. I see this as one of Louisville's best chances to recover the damages our citizens are paying through skyrocketing city expenses born out of the flood of pills. As the mayor said, Peter and the other attorneys working for us assume the risk involved in this litigation. If successful, costs that are approved by the court will be reimbursed and they would receive a percentage of any monies recovered. Peter and I can answer additional questions you have about our complaint or the process moving forward. I can't speak to you today only from an legal analysis as the Jefferson County attorney, and as I do sometimes, I have to speak as a father. My wife, Ellen, and I have 3 children, Michael, Annie, and Matt. Matt, my youngest, we lost in May of 2014 at the age of 33. Matt was a great guy who served his country in Afghanistan as a paratrooper in the Army's 82nd Airborne Division. He worked to overcome addiction throughout a good part of his adult life and had a number of extended periods of being clean and sober. A 2-month inpatient treatment program here in Louisville at the VA Medical Center was especially helpful for him. But despite all the support of family and friends and treatment within the community and all of Matt's attempts to beat it, the pull was just too much. Matt died in the early morning of Derby Day, 2014, from a combination of alcohol, cocaine, and heroin. He was found laid back in the driver's seat of his car, and although he wasn't an overly religious type, despite our attempts to beat it into him, 2 rosaries were found in his blue jeans pocket. How many people in Louisville and across our nation fit a profile similar to that of Matt? People who have sought help and who are taking all the steps you would hope they would to treat their disease. How many have we already lost, and how many are we on the brink of losing because of the grip of addiction being so strong? Matt's death left a hole that for a parent I don't think ever fully heals. This lawsuit is a chance, some small piece of justice for my son Matt and for the countless families who have been decimated by the opioid plague and the power of addiction in our community. These wholesale drug distributors are entrusted with some of the most addictive substances on the planet, either through inaction or complicity in the pursuit of obscene profits. Obscene profits. These distributors created the user base that fuels one of the worst public health crises we have ever faced, and they need to be held accountable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike, and I want to thank him and his family for the courage that they have. They continue to be public with the pain that they suffered, and far too many families in our community are suffering. We're happy to take any questions.
Can you go over again how the outside firm and who's paying for
Yep.
the cost of that again?
Mike, or Peter.
Peter.
We are, I'm Peter Mouget with Levin Papantonio. Our firm and our group of firms, 5 firms in total, are fronting the cost of the litigation and the hours that we're putting into the case, and we'll take a percentage of the recovery, if any recovery, at the end of the case of percentage plus costs.
Are other cities suing the drug makers, and is there any precedence for whether a city can be successful doing this?
There are cities, I mean, we're kind of on the front end of this right now, but I know the city of Dayton, several cities in Ohio have been involved with this. And Peter, you probably have a better
There's
feel.
about 50 cities either filed or in the process of filing a very similar complaint. Louisville is at the front. The cases are getting filed around the Ohio River Valley as we speak, but Louisville is up front. But there are going to be about 40 or 50 lawsuits that are in the process of being filed. We are joining forces, meaning that the core group of firms, the group of firms, represent about 90% of those cities that have filed. So we are all in one cohesive group working together. Yes.
Will those be individual cases, each one, or will it all join together?
They are all individual cases on behalf of either each county, city, metro area like Louisville, but they are all individual cases. It's not a class action. They are individual cases pursuing or proceeding one by one.
And are they filed against each individual distributor, as the others, or are they filed jointly?
They're each individual distributor, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal, and McKesson have 85% of the market share. There's 800 distributors in total. Those three have 85% of the market share and are the defendants named in Louisville's case.
The case be litigated here in Kentucky, or were for those individual companies' homes?
The case is filed here in Kentucky.
Are those three defendants the same defendants in all of the other litigation that you're aware of?
Almost every case has the same three defendants. There are a couple of cases that have additional defendants on top of those three, but those are the three cases, like I said, three defendants that have 85% of the market share.
We've seen attorneys general in other states file lawsuits against drug companies. Please explain the difference between the city's lawsuits and the lawsuits that are filed with the AG.
Some of the AG cases, Attorney General cases that have been filed to date are against manufacturers, which are more of a marketing or a misbranding or a mismarketing case. This case is as the mayor and Michael Connell explained, this is a distribution case. The distributors were placed as the gatekeeper in a position of trust by Congress. They were supposed to be the ones that were monitoring, identifying, and reporting suspicious activity. So as the number of pills into our communities exceeded any reasonable amount, they were supposed to report that to the DEA and even halt shipment to control the amount of opiates. It's not a supply and demand model, as you would see, for example, in a car manufacturer. The more demand, the more supply. Congress put the gatekeepers in charge in a position of trust of monitoring the flow of pills, of opiates into our communities, and that's what this lawsuit is about, which is different than the mismarketing or misbranding of the manufacturer cases.
You're saying the distributors got to police themselves?
The distributors were placed, manufacturers, the closed system, Schedule II narcotics. Congress said the typical model of manufacturers supplying directly to pharmacies and hospitals because of the addictive nature of opiates, that model is not going to work. So we're going to put a group of companies that are licensed by the federal government, distributors, in the middle. And they were the ones that controlled the dam or the water flowing over the dam of the opiates coming into our communities. That was the position that the distributors were put in, and instead of controlling those, they embraced the problem. They embraced the pill mills. They embraced the problem doctors, and instead they opened the spigot gates. If you were to chart out the stock prices of these companies, for example, McKesson's CEO made $160 million in 2016. If you were to chart out and plot out the stock prices and plot out the deaths from opiates and plot out the pills per prescription, they all are highly correlated, meaning they moved exactly in tandem and went up in a straight line. This case is about an abuse of trust and accountability. The city of Louisville and the taxpayers are shouldering the financial burden. This is about putting it back on the companies that caused the mess.
Again, what's the price tag, or what are you seeking?
The price tag at this point is being fronted by the law firms. There is no initial cost to the shareholders.
I mean, what's the price tag of what they've done?
Oh, I'm sorry, price tag. At this point, the economic impact of opiates across the country has been measured at $78.5 billion. We are still working to articulate the exact amount and the impact on the Louisville community, and specifically with the first responders, and we don't have a specific number, but we think that number is going to be well into the 9 figures.
What law created the thing about the wholesale distributors?
The Controlled Substance Act, 1970,
Gosh, is there
CSA.
for which they, like, is there like a standard for which they have to report things?
There are certain standards that they have to report. It depends which source, but 10 to 15% month-to-month increase on the amount of opiates into the communities, into specific pharmacies. But it depends on which specific pharmacy and which specific community. At the end of the day, we're not talking about speeding ticket type of numbers, as both Mike and Mayor Fisher mentioned. These aren't just going 75 in a 70-mile-an-hour zone. You're talking about millions of prescriptions, more prescriptions per people, without these shipments being halted or stopped or even reported.
Is there a reason there wouldn't be an attempt to seek a class action status?
Yes, class action status is everybody lumped together in one suit, so it doesn't matter. The impact on the specific communities are lost. We think it's much better for every single community to pursue their own case, to pursue their own claims, and the amount of opiates that have come into Louisville and come into the state of Kentucky in whole is significantly higher than you're seeing in cities and counties across the country. So we think it's better for the metro area, for Louisville to pursue their own case. It's a stronger case.
Any idea who will litigate it first? Like anyone who's ahead of where we are right now?
The cases that are out in front are a few counties in West Virginia, cities in West Virginia. They're about 6 months ahead, which isn't very far in the grand scheme of things. So at the end of the day, Louisville is going to be right up front with the number of cases that are out there.
And there's
Between
a
West
federal as
Virginia,
well.
they're all federal. West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky are leading the charge and also happen to be the epicenter of the problem, as everyone knows.
Okay, so I want to emphasize this move here today is one part of what the city is doing to fight opioids. So our Office for Addiction Services and our Public Health and Wellness Department has a comprehensive addiction services plan that we're executing throughout the city. Inside of our jail, the biggest users of our jail have mental illness and some type of codependency, either on alcohol or drugs. So we have a withdrawal service inside of the jail as well. And then we're also working with our state and federal partners with enhanced penalties for those that have found to be dealing in heroin that has led to deaths. So just want to emphasize this is one piece today, but it's an important piece because it will allow us to fund those services I just described, and we need more funds for treatment and services in our community. Last comment to anybody, if you have any indication that you think anybody that you know is having a problem with opioids, talk to them, refer them to treatment. The longer it goes on, the more addictive these substances become, and the problem becomes deeper and deeper. But don't look the other way. Thanks everybody for coming out.